Captain Robert Castellano looked at the instrument panel and realized they were all going to die. Number 3, engine. Dead, propeller feathered. Number 2 engine, dying. Oil pressure dropping toward 0. Fuel gauge, maybe 30 minutes left. Distance to England, 70 minutes. The North Sea below, 40 degrees and 12-foot waves. The math was simple and impossible. "Bobby, we need to bail out." His co-pilot, Lieutenant Jimmy Kozlowski's voice was tight but steady. "Right now, while we're still over land." Castellano looked back through the cockpit door. In the back of the fuselage, 3 men were fighting to free Angelo Moretti from the ball turret, the tiny sphere underneath the airplane where the shrapnel had jammed everything. Angelo was trapped in that metal coffin. If they bailed out now, before they could free him, he'd die down there. And this airplane was coming apart. They might all die trying to fly it home, but at least they'd die together. "Negative," Castellano said. "We're not leaving them. We're flying this thing home." "That's insane." "We're flying home." Castellano's hands were shaking on the yoke, but his voice was firm. "All of us. Tell Frank to find me more fuel. Tell Dave to get us the straightest line to England. We've got one shot at this." 44 years later, Boeing engineers would look at photographs of B-17G serial number 44-80846 and say it was impossible. 3 engines dead, hydraulics gone, fuel exhausted. 400 miles over enemy territory with a damaged airframe that should have broken apart. But on February 3, 1945, impossible didn't matter. What mattered was 10 men and a dying airplane and the decision to keep flying. This is how they made it home. February 3, 1945, started at 0430 hours at Ridgewell Airfield in Essex, England, home of the 381st Bomb Group, 533rd Squadron. Captain Robert "Bobby" Castellano, 23 years old from Brooklyn, woke up knowing this was his crew's 25th mission. 25, and you went home. They'd survived 24 trips over Germany, and today's target was Berlin, 600 miles into the worst flak in Europe, and 600 miles back. The crew called their B-17 Lady Luck, because Castellano had kept them alive this long. Today, they needed that luck one more time. At the 600 briefing, the intelligence officer pulled back the curtain, and there it was. Red string stretching across the map from England to Berlin. 600 miles through the worst flak in Europe. The room groaned. Berlin was defended like the gates of hell. Hundreds of 80-meter guns, swarms of fighters, weather that could kill you. Target, Tempelhof rail yards. Mission, cripple German supply lines to the Eastern Front. "Last mission," Kozlowski muttered, sitting next to Castellano. The co-pilot from Chicago had a habit of dark jokes when he was nervous. "What are the odds something goes wrong on the last one?" Technical Sergeant Frank Mitchell, the 30-year-old flight engineer from Pennsylvania, didn't laugh. "Everybody knows guys who died on Mission 25. Let's just get it done and go home." Lady Luck assembled at their plane at 0730, 10 men who'd flown together for 8 months. Pilot and co-pilot up front. Flight engineer Frank Mitchell at the top turret. Navigator Lieutenant David Chen and Bombardier Lieutenant Paul Rizzo in the nose. Ball turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Angelo Moretti underneath. Radio operator Technical Sergeant Marcus Washington. Tail gunner Billy Reeves, and waist gunners O'Brien and Kowalski scattered through the fuselage. They knew each other's voices in the dark. They'd watched friends die and kept each other alive through 24 missions. They were brothers. Today was supposed to be the last day they'd need each other. The engines fired up at 0845, 4 Wright Cyclones roaring to life, props spinning, the whole aircraft shaking. Mitchell ran his checks. Oil pressure good, hydraulics good, everything normal. They took off at 0903, climbed through overcast into sunshine at 18,000 feet, and formed up with 36 B-17s from the 381st. Lady Luck took the middle position in the formation, safest spot. Lead planes got hit first. Tail-end Charlies got picked off. Middle was where you survived. The flight across the North Sea was quiet, too quiet. Mitchell monitored his instruments, everything running smooth. Maybe this would be the easy one. The milk run. 25 and done. They crossed the Dutch coast at 10:15 and the flak started. Black puffs appearing in the sky, 80mm shells throwing shrapnel. You didn't think about it, just flew straight and trusted the odds. At 11:27, about 40 miles from Berlin, 2 German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters came out of the sun, diving fast, guns blazing. The 381st Bomb Group had fighter escorts, P-51 Mustangs that were supposed to keep the German fighters away, but there were never enough escorts, and the German pilots were desperate and skilled and willing to die. The FW-190s came in from 12 o'clock high, straight at the nose of the formation, and they focused their fire on the lead squadron. Castellano watched tracer rounds arc through the sky, watched one of the lead B-17s take hits, saw pieces of metal fly off, saw smoke start to stream from an engine, saw the plane begin to drop out of formation. The FY-190s kept coming, and now every gun on every B-17 was firing, the whole formation putting up a wall of lead. The German fighters broke off, one of them trailing smoke, and disappeared into the clouds below. "Everybody okay back there?" Castellano called over the intercom. "Tail's good," Billy Reeves reported. "Ball turret clear," Angelo Moretti said. One by one, the crew checked in. No hits. Lady Luck was still intact. But Castellano could see that the lead plane was in trouble. Still flying, but losing altitude, dropping back. The deputy lead was taking over and the formation was tightening up, closing the gaps. They hit the initial point, the IP, where the bombardier took control, and they flew straight and level toward the target no matter what. At 11:42, this was the worst part of any mission. For the next 10 minutes, they couldn't maneuver, couldn't evade, just had to fly a predictable course while the bombardier lined up his sights. And the Germans knew it. This was when they hit you with everything. The flak over Berlin was the worst Castellano had ever seen. The sky turned black with explosions. You could hear the shells bursting even through the engine noise, hear the shrapnel hitting the airplane like hail on a tin roof. The B-17 shook and rattled. The smell of smoke and cordite came through the oxygen masks. Castellano gripped the yoke and flew straight, counting seconds, waiting for Paulie Rizzo's voice to say, "Bombs away." That's when Lady Luck got hit. The first shell took out number 3 engine, the inboard engine on the right wing. 1 second it was running smooth, the next second there was a flash and a bang and the engine just died. Mitchell immediately hit the feathering button, which turned the propeller blades edge-on to reduce drag, and pulled the fire suppression handle. The engine fire indicator light flickered and went out. "Number 3's gone," Mitchell reported, his voice steady. "No fire, feathered." 3 engines were enough. A B-17 could fly on 3 engines, could even maintain formation if the engines were balanced right. This was manageable. This was survivable. Then the second shell hit. This one struck the left wing, about halfway between the fuselage and the wingtip. It punched a hole through the aluminum skin big enough to stick your head through, severed fuel lines, and damaged the main wing spar. Castellano felt the airplane shudder, felt something fundamental change in how she flew. The left wing dipped, and he had to fight the controls to keep level. "Jesus Christ!" Kozlowski yelled. He could see the damage from his co-pilot seat, could see the jagged hole in the wing, could see fuel streaming out in a white mist. "We're leaking fuel, left-wing tanks." Mitchell was already on it, switching fuel selectors, trying to isolate the damaged tank and reroute fuel from the intact tanks. The B-17 carried 2,700 gallons of fuel in 9 different tanks, 6 in the wings, 3 in the fuselage. Losing one tank was bad, but not fatal if you could stop the leak and use the other tanks. "How bad?" Castellano asked. "Bad. I'm shutting off the left wing tanks. We've got maybe, 60% of our fuel left? Maybe less." Mitchell's voice was still steady, but you could hear the strain now. "We can make it back if nothing else goes wrong." That's when Paulie Rizzo's voice came through the intercom. "Bombs away!" The B-17 lurched upward as 6 1,000-pound bombs dropped from the bomb bay, and Castellano immediately started a turn to the left, heading back toward England, trying to catch up with the formation that had already turned and was pulling away. And that's when the third shell hit. This one was the worst. It exploded directly underneath Lady Luck, right under the ball turret where Angelo Moretti was crouched in his tiny metal sphere. The explosion threw shrapnel up through the bottom of the airplane, punching hundreds of holes through the aluminum skin, severing hydraulic lines, electrical cables, control linkages. The ball turret took a direct hit. "Angelo!" someone screamed over the intercom. The ball turret should have been a death trap. A tiny sphere hanging underneath the airplane, impossible to escape from if the plane was going down. But Angelo Moretti was lucky. The shrapnel had missed him by inches, tore through the metal around him, destroyed his guns, knocked out his electrical power, but he was alive. The turret was stuck, though, wouldn't rotate, and the guns were gone. "I'm hit!" Angelo's voice was shaking. "Turret's stuck. I can't move. Everything's dead. Can you get out?" Castellano demanded. "I'm trying. The manual crank. It's jammed. I can't." Angelo's voice rose in pitch, panic setting in. He was trapped in a metal ball underneath a damaged airplane, and if they had to bail out or crash land, he was going to die down there. "Billy, Tommy, Johnny, get him out of there," Castellano ordered. The waist gunners could manually crank the ball turret until the hatch lined up with the opening in the fuselage floor, then pull Angelo up through it. But it would take time and manpower. "We're on it," O'Brien said. Meanwhile, Mitchell was reporting more bad news. "Hydraulics are gone. We've got no brakes, no turret traverse, no bomb bay doors. We're flying on manual controls only, and..." He paused, checking instruments. Number 2 engine's running rough. Oil pressure's dropping. Number 2 was the inboard engine on the left wing. If they lost that engine, they'd only have 2 engines left, both on the right wing. You couldn't fly a B-17 with only 2 engines on one wing. The asymmetric thrust would make the plane uncontrollable. They'd spin and die. "Can you keep it running?" Castellano asked, already knowing the answer. "For a while, maybe. I don't know." Mitchell's voice had lost its earlier steadiness. "Bobby, we're fucked. We've got holes everywhere. One engine dead, another engine dying, no hydraulics, leaking fuel, and we're 400 miles from England over enemy territory." Castellano looked at the instruments. Looked at the airspeed indicator. They were slowing down. Looked at the altimeter. They were slowly losing altitude. Looked at the compass. They were off course. The formation they'd been flying with was pulling away, disappearing into the distance. In 5 minutes, they'd be alone. And alone over Germany meant you died. "We're not going to make it," Kozlowski said quietly. He was looking out at the damaged left wing. at the fuel still streaming from the hole, at the number 2 engine that was starting to trail smoke. "Bobby, we need to bail out now while we're still over land, before the engines quit completely." It was the logical choice, the smart choice. Jump out, hope your parachute opened, hope you landed in friendly territory, or got captured by regular German army instead of SS or an angry mob of civilians. 10 men had a chance of surviving if they bailed out. Maybe 8 of them would make it, maybe 6. Better odds than trying to fly a dying airplane 400 miles. But Castellano looked back at the fuselage, where O'Brien and Kowalski and Reeves were desperately trying to crank Angelo Moretti's ball turret around so they could get him out. If they bailed out now, Angelo would die trapped in that turret. They couldn't get him out fast enough. And Castellano had a rule: nobody gets left behind. "Negative," Castellano said. "We're not bailing out. We're flying this thing home." "Bobby, that's insane. We're not leaving Angelo in that turret. And we're not jumping into Germany. Frank, can you keep that number 2 engine running?" Mitchell looked at his instruments. The oil pressure on number 2 was down to 20 pounds per square inch and dropping. The engine was dying, but maybe he could coax it along for a while longer. "I can try," he said finally, "but I'm making no promises." "That's all I need. Dave," Castellano called to the navigator, "get me a course for England, most direct route, and figure out how much fuel we have left." David Chen was hunched over his navigation table in the nose, trying to work the numbers while the airplane shook and rattled around him. He was good at math, had been an engineering student at MIT before the war, and he did the calculations fast. "Course heading 275, he reported. "That's directly west, basically straight line to England. Distance is approximately 640 kilometers. That's about 400 miles. Current airspeed is, we're doing about 140 miles per hour and slowing. At this rate, we're looking at almost 3 hours in the air." "And fuel?" Chen did more math. "With the left wing tanks offline and the leak, we've got maybe 1,500 pounds of fuel left, maybe less. The engines are burning about 200 pounds per hour each. We've got 3 engines running, so that's 600 pounds per hour total. 500 divided by 600 is..." He paused. 2.5 hours of fuel. "Bobby, we're going to run out about 30 minutes before we reach England." The crew digested that in silence. They were going to run out of fuel over the North Sea, 30 miles from home. They'd make it so close and then ditch in the water. February water. North Sea water. You had about 10 minutes before hypothermia killed you. "Well," Kozlowski said, "at least we won't die over Germany." "We're not dying anywhere," Castellano said firmly. "Frank, can you lean out the fuel mixture? Reduce our consumption?" "Already doing it," Mitchell said. "I've got the mixtures pulled back as far as I can without making the engines run too rough. We're burning maybe 550 pounds per hour now instead of 600. That gives us..." He did quick math in his head. "About 20 more minutes. We'll run out 15 minutes from England instead of 30. It's something. Dave, is there any way to shorten the route?" "Cut corners? Not without flying over more German territory, and I don't think this plane can handle more flak. This is the most direct path." Castellano thought about it. They had a plane that was falling apart. 1 engine dead, 1 engine dying, holes everywhere, leaking fuel, no hydraulics, and 400 miles to go. The odds said they should bail out now. The odds said flying this airplane home was impossible. Castellano looked at his crew, looked at Frank Mitchell fighting to keep the engines running, looked at Jimmy Kozlowski, white-knuckled on the co-pilot's controls, helping him hold the airplane level. Heard O'Brien and Kowalski and Reeves in the back still trying to free Angelo from the ball turret. Heard Marcus Washington on the radio trying to call for help even though the radio was damaged and probably not transmitting. Heard Billy Reeves in the tail reporting German fighters 2 miles back, but not closing. They could smell blood, but Lady Luck still had her guns, and they were being cautious. This crew had kept Castellano alive through 24 missions. He wasn't going to quit on them now. "We're going home," he said, "all of us, in this airplane. Frank, keep those engines running. Jimmy, help me fly this thing. Dave, keep us on course. Everybody else, stay sharp and pray like hell. We've got 400 miles in about 3 hours. Let's make it count." The first hour wasn't too bad. They were over Germany, flying alone now. The formation was long gone, but at 20,000 feet and doing 140 miles per hour. The number 2 engine kept running, though it was getting rougher. Mitchell was constantly adjusting the mixture, the throttle, trying to find the sweet spot where the engine would keep producing power without destroying itself. He was talking to the engine like it was a sick patient, coaxing it, pleading with it. "Come on, girl," he muttered. "Just keep turning, just a little longer. You can do it." Back in the fuselage, they finally got Angelo Moretti out of the ball turret. It took 30 minutes of cranking and prying and cursing, but they got the turret rotated enough to line up the hatch, then pulled him up through the hole in the floor. Angelo was shaking, part cold, part shock, part relief, and he had a cut on his forehead from where a piece of shrapnel had grazed him, but he was alive. "I thought I was dead," Angelo said, his voice shaking. "I was sure I was dead." "You're not dead," O'Brien said. "But you owe us all a beer when we get back. I owe you a whole goddamn brewery." The second hour was worse. They crossed into Holland around 13:30 and immediately took more flak. The Germans had batteries all along the Dutch coast, and they saw a lone B-17 limping west and they opened up. Castellano tried to jinx, throw the airplane around to make it a harder target, but Lady Luck didn't want to maneuver anymore. She was flying straight and level, and that was about all she could manage. The flak bursts walked across the sky toward them, black puffs getting closer, and then one burst right underneath them. The shrapnel tore through the airplane, more holes, more damage, and this time one piece hit David Chen. The navigator screamed. Paulie Rizzo, sitting next to him in the nose, saw blood, saw Chen grab his leg, saw him go down. "We've got wounded. Navigator's hit." "How bad?" Castellano's voice was tight. Rizzo checked. There was a piece of shrapnel about 2 inches long embedded in Chen's thigh, and blood was pumping out around it. Not arterial spray. If it was arterial, he'd be dead in minutes, but bad enough. "He needs a medic. It's bleeding pretty bad." "Somebody get the first aid kit." But even as Castellano said it, he knew it didn't matter. They didn't have a medic. The best they could do was pressure bandages and sulfanilamide powder and hope Chen didn't bleed out. Marcus Washington came forward from the radio room with the first aid kit. He'd been a pre-med student before the war, had more medical knowledge than anyone else on the crew. He took one look at Chen's leg and knew it was bad. The shrapnel had cut deep, possibly nicked an artery. If they didn't stop the bleeding, Chen would go into shock and die. Washington worked fast. Cut away Chen's flight suit around the wound. Poured sulfa powder directly into the hole. The powder would help prevent infection. Then he took gauze and wrapped it tight, applying pressure, trying to stop the bleeding. Chen was conscious but pale, breathing hard, teeth gritted against the pain. "Stay with me, Lieutenant," Washington said. "You're going to be okay. We're going to get you home." Chen nodded, unable to speak. The pain was intense. Felt like someone had stuck a hot poker into his leg and was twisting it. But he was the navigator. They needed him to get home. He pulled himself up to his navigation table, leg screaming in protest, and looked at his maps with unfocused eyes. "I'm okay," he lied. "I can navigate, just give me a second." At 13:45, the number 2 engine finally died. Mitchell had been nursing it along for over 2 hours, and the engine had given everything it had, but the oil was gone now, and the bearings were seizing, and the engine just couldn't run anymore. It shuddered, coughed, and stopped. The propeller windmilled for a moment, and then Mitchell feathered it, turning the blades to reduce drag. "Number 2's gone," Mitchell reported. "We're on 2 engines, both on the right wing." This was it. This was the death sentence. You could not fly a B-17 on 2 engines mounted on the same wing. The asymmetric thrust would push the plane into an uncontrollable left turn. The rudder could compensate for a little asymmetry, but not this much. Castellano was going to have to use constant right rudder just to keep the nose pointed straight, and his leg was going to get tired, and eventually he'd lose the fight, and the airplane would roll left and spin, and that would be it. "Bobby, we can't fly like this," Kozlowski said. He could see what was happening, could see the airplane wanting to turn left, could see Castellano fighting the rudder pedals, could see the strain on his face. "We're going to stall. We need to bail out now." "Not yet," Castellano grunted. His right leg was already aching from the constant pressure on the rudder pedal. The airplane wanted to roll left. Every instinct in the plane was telling it to turn, and he was fighting it with brute strength and determination. "We can make it. We're over Holland now, friendly territory. If we bail out here, we've got a chance of linking up with resistance. If we don't bail out, we're going to crash. Then we crash. But we're staying with the plane as long as she'll fly." They flew on. Castellano's leg was screaming now. The rudder pedal was fighting him constantly, and he had to push with everything he had just to keep the nose pointed west. His calf muscle was cramping. His thigh was burning. He couldn't do this for 2 more hours. He couldn't do this for 20 more minutes. "Jimmy, you're going to have to take the rudder," Castellano said through gritted teeth. "Trade off with me. I can't hold it much longer." Kozlowski nodded. They worked it out. Kozlowski would take the rudder for 5 minutes while Castellano rested his leg. Then Castellano would take it back. 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. It wasn't ideal. You lost a little altitude every time they switched, but it was the only way to keep flying. At 14:15, they crossed the Dutch coast and reached the North Sea. This was both good and bad. Good because they were over water now, not enemy territory. Bad because if they ditched in the water, they were dead. The water temperature was maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit. You had 10 minutes before hypothermia killed you, and the North Sea in February was rough. Waves 12 feet high. A B-17 ditching in that sea would break apart on impact. Maybe 2 men would make it into a life raft. Maybe. Chen, working through his pain and blood loss, gave them the navigation update. "We're about 120 miles from the English coast. At our current speed, we're down to about 110 miles per hour now. That's about 70 minutes. Call it an hour and 15 to be safe." "And fuel?" Castellano asked, though he already knew the answer. Mitchell checked the gauges. "We've got maybe 400 pounds left. Maybe. That's 30 minutes of fuel, 40 if we're lucky. We're not going to make it." The crew was silent. Everyone was doing the same math. 70 minutes to England. 30 minutes of fuel. They were going to run out of fuel 40 minutes from home, over the North Sea, with no way to ditch safely. "We're not going to make it," Kozlowski said again. "We have to," Castellano said. "There's no other option." "Bobby, math doesn't lie. We don't have the fuel." "Then we'll find more fuel. Frank, check the tanks again, every tank. Is there anything we missed?" Mitchell had already checked, but he checked again. Went through every fuel selector, every gauge, every line. And then he remembered something. Wait, the auxiliary tank, the fuselage tank. His voice got urgent. We never fill it. Adds weight, reduces bomb load. Standard procedure is to leave it empty. But this morning, when we were pre-flighting, I saw a ground crew topping it off. I didn't question it because we were behind schedule and I figured they knew what they were doing. I completely forgot about it. Didn't even think to check because we never use it. How much is in it? If it's full, maybe 300 pounds. But it's manual feed. We have to hand pump it to the engines. It's slow, and it's a pain in the ass, and you can only do it when the engines are running smooth. And ours aren't running smooth. Can you do it? Mitchell looked at the controls. Looked at the hand pump that would let him transfer fuel from the auxiliary tank to the main tanks. It was going to be brutal. Standing there in the freezing fuselage, pumping for 30 minutes straight, while the airplane shook and rattled around him. But it might give them enough fuel to make it. I can try, Mitchell said. For the next 30 minutes, Frank Mitchell stood at the fuel pump in the freezing fuselage and pumped. It was a double-action hand pump, like pumping water from a well. You pushed down, pulled up, pushed down, pulled up, over and over, and slowly fuel transferred from the auxiliary tank to the mains. His arms burned, his back screamed, his hands went numb, but he kept pumping. Come on, he muttered with each stroke. Come on, come on, come on. Back in the cockpit, Castellano and Kozlowski traded off on the rudder pedal, 5 minutes each, fighting to keep the airplane flying straight. The strain was incredible. Castellano's entire right leg was one solid cramp. Kozlowski wasn't doing much better. They'd been fighting the controls for over 2 hours now, and they were exhausted. Chen was barely conscious in the nose. He'd lost a lot of blood, and Washington's bandages were soaked through. They'd given him morphine from the first aid kit, which helped with the pain but made him drowsy. He kept falling asleep and then jerking awake, trying to focus on his maps, trying to keep them on course. "Stay with us, Dave," Washington said quietly, checking his pulse. It was fast and thready, signs of shock. "We need you." "I'm okay," Chen mumbled, "just tired, so tired." At 14:25, they spotted land. The English coast materializing out of the mist like a miracle. They'd made it. They were over England. They were home, but they still had to land. And landing a B-17 with no hydraulics, no brakes, one engine on each wing, and a damaged wing structure was going to be nearly impossible. Castellano knew how to fly, but he'd never landed a plane in this condition. Nobody had. This was going to be a controlled crash at best. "Ridgewell Tower, this is Lady Luck," Marcus Washington called on the radio, not knowing if it was even transmitting. "We are inbound, heavily damaged. Request emergency landing clearance." For a moment, nothing. Then static and a voice. "Lady Luck, this is Ridgewell Tower. We read you faint. Say your status." 2 engines, both right wing, no hydraulics, navigator wounded, fuel critical. Request straight-in approach, clear the field. There was a pause. Then, "Lady Luck, Roger. You are cleared for emergency landing. Fire crews are standing by. Good luck." They were 10 miles from Ridgewell now. They could see the airfield, the runway stretching out like a promise. So close. They'd made it 400 miles and they were right there. For a moment, Castellano let himself believe they'd actually make it. Number 4 engine was still running. The fuel gauge showed fumes, but it was enough. Just a few more minutes. And then the number 1 engine quit, just died. Fuel starvation. Despite Mitchell's desperate pumping, despite everything, they'd run out. Number 1 engine coughed once and stopped. Now they had 1 engine. Number 4, the outboard engine on the right wing. One engine on a 65,000-pound airplane that needed 4 engines to fly properly. You could not maintain altitude on one engine. You could not control the airplane on one engine. You could only glide, and glide was just another word for falling slowly. "We're going down," Kozlowski said, his voice surprisingly calm. "We're not going to make the runway." Castellano could see it too. They were at 3,000 feet altitude and 8 miles from the runway. At their current glide rate, they were descending at about 500 feet per minute. They had 6 minutes before they hit the ground. The runway was maybe 4 minutes away. They were going to come up short. "We're going to make it," Castellano said, though he didn't believe it. "Bobby, we're going to make it. Dave, how far to the runway?" Chen forced his eyes open, looked at his maps with vision that kept blurring. 8 miles, maybe 7 now. And our altitude? 2,800 feet and dropping. Castellano did the math in his head. At their current glide ratio, they'd hit the ground about 2 miles short of the runway. 2 miles of English countryside, fields and hedgerows and stone walls. If they tried to land in a field, the plane would break apart. The damaged wing would catch on something and they'd cartwheel and everyone would die. Unless... "Frank," Castellano called. "Is there any way to restart that number 1 engine? Even for a minute. We don't have fuel. We have to have something. Check the lines. Maybe there's enough trapped in the system to get 30 seconds of power." Mitchell dove for the engine controls. He knew it was hopeless. The fuel was gone, but he tried anyway, hit the starter, worked the primer pump, played with the mixture, and incredibly, impossibly, the engine coughed. Caught, ran for maybe 5 seconds, then died again. But 5 seconds was enough. 5 seconds of thrust from the number 1 engine brought the nose up slightly, gave them another 50 feet of altitude, bought them another 15 seconds in the air. "Again!" Castellano shouted. "Do it again!" Mitchell tried. The engine coughed, ran for 3 seconds, died. Another 30 feet of altitude gained. They were at 2,000 feet now. 5 miles from the runway. They were going to come up short by maybe a mile. So damn close. "Everybody who can walk, get to the tail," Castellano ordered. "Move the center of gravity back. Give us more lift." The crew didn't question it. O'Brien, Kowalski, Reeves, Moretti. Everyone who wasn't at a critical station moved to the back of the airplane. Even Washington helped carry Chen to the tail, despite his wounded leg. The center of gravity shifted aft, changing the airplane's balance, giving them a tiny bit more lift. Maybe enough. Maybe. They were at 1,500 feet. 4 miles out. Lady Luck was gliding, engine silent except for the windmilling propellers, and all you could hear was the wind rushing past the damaged airframe, whistling through the hundreds of holes. The airplane was groaning, metal creaking, and Castellano could feel her wanting to give up. She'd carried them 400 miles and she was done. She wanted to quit. "Not yet," Castellano whispered to her. "Just a little more. Come on, girl, just a little more. 1,000 feet, 3 miles. The runway was right there, they could see it, but they were too low. They weren't going to make it. Start thinking about crash positions," Kozlowski said quietly. "This is going to be bad." But Castellano was still flying, still fighting. The yoke was in his hands and he was working it, trying to stretch every foot of altitude, every second of glide. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, but he kept flying. 500 feet, 2 miles. They could see the fire trucks at the end of the runway, could see the meat wagon, the ambulance, waiting. The tower could see them coming. Coming down too steep, too fast, but coming. And then Castellano saw it. There was a training field short of the runway, a grass strip about a mile from the main field where student pilots practiced takeoffs and landings. It was rough, it was short, it wasn't designed for B-17s, but it was there, and it was closer than the main runway. "I'm putting her down in the training field," Castellano said. "Bobby, that's suicide. The gear's coming down, gravity drop. No hydraulics means it freefalls into position. It might not lock, but it'll give us something." He pulled the gear release handle. Without hydraulic pressure, the landing gear fell under its own weight, the 3 wheels, nose and 2 mains, dropping and hopefully locking into place. The indicator lights should have shown green for locked, but the electrical system was mostly dead, so Castellano couldn't confirm. He just had to trust. The nose gear had taken shrapnel damage when that shell exploded under the ball turret, same hit that trapped Angelo, and Castellano knew the strut was probably compromised. But a damaged gear was better than no gear. 300 feet. They were over the training field now. Castellano had one shot at this. Too steep and they'd hit hard and break apart. Too shallow and they'd overshoot and run out of field. He had to get it exactly right. "Brace for impact," he called out. "This is going to be rough." He pulled the yoke back, trying to flare, raised the nose to slow the descent. But the airplane was sluggish, didn't want to respond. The ground was rushing up. He could see individual blades of grass, could see the fence at the far end of the field. They were coming in fast, too fast, but there was nothing he could do about it now. The main landing gear touched first, a jarring impact that sent shocks through the entire airframe. The nose gear came down hard, the wheel collapsing immediately because the strut was damaged from flak. The nose of the B-17 plowed into the ground, dirt spraying everywhere. The airplane was skidding, sliding across the grass field, tearing up earth. And Castellano had no brakes, no way to stop her. "Hold on," he screamed. Lady Luck slid 800 feet across the training field. The props on the right wing hit the ground and bent, sending the engines into violent vibration. The left wing dipped, and the tip caught the earth, ripping off, metal tearing with a shriek. The airplane spun slightly, still sliding, heading for the fence at the far end of the field. And then, finally, impossibly, she stopped. Just stopped. 20 feet from the fence. The engines were dead, the props were destroyed, the nose was crumpled, the left wing was gone. The fuselage was riddled with holes. Fuel was dripping from ruptured tanks. Smoke was rising from the number 4 engine. But they were down. They were alive. All 10 men. For a moment, nobody moved. They just sat there in the shattered airplane, breathing hard, unable to believe it was over. Then Castellano's voice came through the intercom, shaking with exhaustion and emotion. "Everybody out. Now, in case she catches fire." They evacuated fast. The belly hatch was jammed, but they got the side door open and tumbled out onto the grass. Chen had to be carried. Washington and Rizzo took him, one on each side. Angelo Moretti's legs wouldn't work right after 2 hours in the ball turret and 3 hours of terror, so O'Brien just threw him over his shoulder and carried him out. They scrambled away from the airplane, got maybe 50 yards clear, and then turned to look at her. Lady Luck looked like she'd been through a shredder. Holes everywhere. The left wing mostly gone. The nose crushed, the props bent, fuel dripping. And yet somehow, impossibly, she'd carried them home. Fire trucks were racing across the field. The ambulance was coming. But the crew of Lady Luck just stood there in the February grass, staring at their airplane, unable to process what had just happened. "We flew that thing 400 miles, Mitchell said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "On one engine, with no hydraulics. We flew it home. Nobody's going to believe us," Kozlowski said. "I don't believe us," Moretti added. Castellano walked up to the airplane, put his hand on the torn metal. Lady Luck was never going to fly again. She'd given everything she had and she was done. They'd write her off, cut her up for scrap, but she'd done her job. She'd brought her crew home. "Thank you," Castellano whispered. "Thank you for getting us home." The crew of Lady Luck was pulled off flight status immediately. Chen was rushed to the hospital. He'd lost a lot of blood and needed surgery to remove the shrapnel and repair the damaged blood vessels. The doctors said if Washington hadn't applied pressure when he did, Chen would have bled out over the North Sea. The rest of the crew spent 2 days being debriefed by intelligence officers who kept asking the same question. How did you fly a plane in that condition? Nobody had a good answer. Mitchell tried to explain the fuel management. Castellano tried to explain the rudder work. Kozlowski tried to explain the engine restarts. But none of it made sense when you added it all up. By every engineering standard, by every reasonable calculation, Lady Luck should have crashed in Germany or ditched in the North Sea. The fact that she hadn't, that all 10 men had walked away, was impossible. The photos were taken 3 days later by a technical team from the 8th Air Force Engineering Section. They wanted to document the damage for training purposes, to help other crews understand what a B-17 could survive. When they saw Lady Luck sitting in pieces in the field, they couldn't believe it had flown. "This is impossible," one of the engineers said. "The structural damage alone should have caused in-flight breakup. The fuel calculations don't work. The engine-out flying characteristics make no sense. This airplane flew 400 miles and landed against every principle of aerodynamics and physics that I know." His report concluded, "It is the opinion of this investigator that the survival of this aircraft and crew cannot be attributed to mechanical factors alone." The structural integrity was compromised beyond the point of expected failure. The fuel remaining was insufficient for the distance traveled. The engine configuration should have resulted in uncontrollable flight characteristics. The successful return of B-17G 448846 must therefore be attributed to extraordinary pilot skill, crew coordination, and factors beyond the scope of this technical report. The official after-action report was more succinct. Aircraft sustained heavy damage from enemy action over Berlin. Crew displayed exceptional skill in returning aircraft safely to base. All personnel commended. It didn't mention that the airplane had flown 400 miles on dying engines. Didn't mention the fuel pumping. Didn't mention Chen bleeding in the nose. Didn't mention Castellano and Kozlowski trading off the rudder pedals. Didn't mention Mitchell coaxing engines that should have quit. Didn't mention the impossible landing on one wheel. The official record was clean and simple, and completely inadequate to capture what had actually happened. Castellano wrote his letter in March 1945 and locked it in a safety deposit box with the photos. The official report said moderate damage, and he didn't correct it. He never told anyone the full story because he didn't want the families to know. Didn't want them to understand that for 3 hours on February 3, 1945, their sons and husbands were as good as dead. Didn't want them lying awake at night imagining that dying airplane limping across the North Sea. Some burdens you carried alone so the people you loved didn't have to. But he also wanted the truth to exist somewhere, eventually. That's why he wrote the letter and hid it away. The crew flew 2 more missions after Lady Luck went down. They were assigned to a different B-17 and finished their 25 mission tours. Then they went home. Most of them stayed in touch for a few years after the war. Angelo Moretti opened a restaurant in Boston. Frank Mitchell went back to Pennsylvania and became a mechanic at a car dealership. Jimmy Kozlowski flew for United Airlines for 30 years. David Chen finished his engineering degree at MIT and designed bridges. Marcus Washington became a doctor in Alabama. Billy Reeves moved to California. The others scattered across the country, building lives, having families, trying to forget the war. Robert Castellano married his high school sweetheart in 1946, had 3 kids, worked as a pilot for Pan Am. He flew Boeing 707s across the Atlantic, and every time he looked down at the North Sea, he thought about that February day in 1945 when he'd been sure he was going to die in that water. He never talked about Lady Luck, never told his wife the full story, never told his kids why he sometimes woke up at night with his right leg cramping, still feeling that rudder pedal pushing back, still fighting to keep the airplane flying. He died in 1988, and his son Michael found the letter and the photos in 1989. When Michael opened that safety deposit box and saw what was inside, he knew the story needed to be told. The 3 surviving crew members, Jimmy Kozlowski, Marcus Washington, and Angelo Moretti, were still alive. Michael tracked them down, and when they talked about that mission 44 years later, they all broke down crying. The memory of being so sure they were going to die and then somehow not dying. The memory of flying an airplane that shouldn't have flown. The memory of making it home against every odd. The Boeing engineer who looked at the photos in 1989 was right. There was no engineering explanation for how Lady Luck made it home. The damage was too severe. The fuel was too low. The engine configuration was impossible. By every rule of physics and aerodynamics and common sense, that airplane should have crashed. But it didn't. Because 10 men refused to give up. Because Robert Castellano kept flying even when his leg was screaming. Because Frank Mitchell pumped fuel for 30 minutes straight with frozen hands. Because Jimmy Kozlowski traded off the rudder and never complained. Because David Chen navigated while bleeding out. Because Marcus Washington kept Chen alive with nothing but gauze and pressure. Because the whole crew worked together, each man doing his impossible part, trusting each other completely. That's the real story, not the engineering report, not the official after-action record. The real story is about what happens when men decide they're not going to die, even when everything says they should, when they push past exhaustion and fear and pain because there's no other choice, when they keep going because their brothers need them to keep going. Lady Luck wasn't just the name of an airplane. It was what happened when skill and determination and brotherhood combined with just enough luck to make the impossible happen. The engineers were right. That airplane shouldn't have made it home. But it did. Because sometimes when everything else fails, all you need is a crew that refuses to quit. The wreckage of B-17G 448846 was scrapped in March 1945. The metal was probably melted down and turned into something else. Another airplane, a jeep, who knows. The story disappeared with it, locked in a safety deposit box in Portland, Oregon, known only to the 10 men who'd lived it. 44 years passed. Robert Castellano died in 1988. Never having told the full story. His son Michael found the key to the safety deposit box in his father's effects and opened it in January 1989. Inside were photographs that didn't make sense. A B-17 so damaged it looked like it had been through a metal shredder. Flight logs that contradicted the official records. And a letter, typed on yellowed paper, dated March 1945. Michael showed the photos to a reporter named Jennifer Hayes, who was working on a story about forgotten war heroes. She looked at the damage and couldn't believe what she was seeing. "This plane flew 400 miles, she asked. "That's impossible." "That's what my father wrote," Michael said, handing her the letter. "He said nobody would believe it. That's why he never told anyone." Jennifer spent 3 months tracking down the surviving crew members. Of the 10 men who'd flown that mission, only 3 were still alive in 1989, Jimmy Kozlowski, Marcus Washington, and Angelo Moretti. She interviewed them separately, and their stories matched perfectly. They all broke down crying when they talked about it. 44 years later, and it still had that power over them. She showed the photographs to a Boeing engineer at the company's Seattle plant. He studied them for a long time, checking the damage against his understanding of B-17 structural limits. Finally, he said, "Nobody survives that. Look at this damage. The structural integrity is completely compromised. The hydraulics are gone. Half of the control surfaces are destroyed. This aircraft should have broken apart at altitude." The fact that it didn't, I don't have an engineering explanation for that. That's not flying, that's falling with style. "But it happened," Jennifer said. "Yes," the engineer said quietly. "It happened." Which means there are things about flying, about what humans can accomplish under pressure, that engineering can't account for. Jennifer published the story in Aviation History magazine in 1990. The article got passed around flight schools and military academies as an example of what determination and skill could accomplish. People still tell the story today. It's become legend, but the real monument isn't the story. It's the 10 men who flew that mission and came home. 9 of them are gone now. The last survivor passed away in 2015, but they all lived full lives because of what they did on February 3, 1945. They had kids and grandkids. They built businesses and careers. They watched the world change. All because they refused to bail out, refused to give up, refused to accept that the math said they were going to die. That's what makes the story matter. Not the impossible engineering, not the dramatic rescue, just 10 men coming home to live their lives. That's the real miracle. Robert Castellanos' letter ended with this line: "Tell people that sometimes you don't need a working airplane. You just need a crew that refuses to quit." That's the truth of Lady Luck. That's what the Boeing engineers couldn't quantify in their reports. That's what made the impossible happen. 10 men and a dying airplane flew 400 miles home because they decided that's what they were going to do. And sometimes that's all you need.